Welcome back, everybody. We're here with RC Fisher from FF Metrics, Chris Valello from Bet the Close, and we've got an exciting episode for you guys today. We're going to break down each and every divisional round playoff game. So we'll go in the order in which the game will be played. First one on the docket are the Houston Texans going into Kansas City, who had a bye, and the point spread there is -9. Casey's favored by 9. Over under is 41 points, and the game's going to be played, I believe, 4:30 on Saturday. Right now we're looking about at 22 degrees and 14-mile-per-hour winds. I'll give out my pick first, and then I'll throw it out to RC and Chris for them to break down their thoughts on the game. So I'm going to go with Casey -9, Chris, RC. What says you guys?
I say you're lying.
Am I?
What's -9?
That's what I had on pregame. What did you have?
Everybody didn't bet this at -7.5 on Sunday afternoon.
That was certainly the line.
So, yeah, I'm with Kansas City -7.5 with the actual bet that I placed. But I would also do -8.5 or -9.
And did you get encouraged at all by what the Texans put on tape? I mean, obviously, like, they were kind of like limping into the playoffs. They had that really bad loss against Baltimore, 31-2 at home, but then they come back. They win by close to 20 points against the Chargers. Does that impress you at all or change your stance on the Texans?
I still say that game last week was the Chargers waltzing right down the field on their first two drives, which I think Stroud threw an interception. So the Chargers got the ball first, drove right down the field, did their typical 3rd and 1 in the red zone. We're going to telegraph a run from about 1 billion miles away, get stuffed, and then settle for a field goal. I think that's how the first drive ended. But prior to that, they're just chopping their way right down the field like Houston isn't even there. They settle for the field goal because, of course, they do. 3-0. Stroud throws a pick on the very first play, if I remember correctly. So Houston's set up on the Chargers are set up on their side of the field, start driving right down, but of course, flop the drive, settle for a field goal. It's 6-0 right off the bat. It should have been 10 or 14-0. Then they scuffle back and forth. Then with about 6 minutes left in the first half, with Houston doing absolutely nothing, the announcers are talking about, like, they're announcing the Texans' total yardage like it's the stock market during the 9 to 4 hours on CNBC. They're like, and the Texans only have 50 yards of offense, and the Texans only have 30 yards of offense. Like, Stroud's getting sacked. They can't do anything. They get the ball back to the goal line, like punt down to the 1-yard line. 6 minutes left. They scramble a couple of first downs. It takes them 4 minutes to get 2 first downs, to get a little bit of space away from their goal line. But then penalties hit or whatever happens. 3rd and 16 with 2 minutes left. That's when that snap goes off of Stroud's hands or off of his hip. He wasn't ready for the snap. The ball is tumbling near their goal line. Down 6-0 with maybe only 50 yards of offense. That ball bounces a different way. The Chargers get it and go up 13-0. That game is all but over. Instead, the ball takes a beautiful hop right into Stroud's hands as he's rolling, helps him roll out, helps him get away from the sack that was about to happen. The whole chaos of the play has the defense coverage breakdown, and that's when Stroud hits that 30-yard pass on 3rd and 17 on a bad snap, throws it downfield, gets the first. Then all of a sudden they got momentum, and they went down and scored that touchdown. And all of a sudden the Chargers are in the lead before the half when they were one bounce of that football away from it being all taken away from them, from it being 13-0, from them having 30, 40, 50 yards of offense in the first half, and then they go on from there. I don't think they were that impressive at all. It's just the ball bounced their way, then they got momentum, then the game got out of hand. I think they're going to walk into a buzzsaw in Kansas City on a number of levels. Had Houston not had that big fortuitous run when they were down 6-0, if they didn't have such a game that looked like they blew out the Chargers, but I don't believe that they did, and I don't respect the Chargers, so I'm not that impressed with the win. This point spread would probably be over 10 if they scuffled to a victory, or if they just didn't have a game, like if this is the first game of the playoffs and this was Houston at Kansas City, I think the point spread would have been over 10. So I love Kansas City laying the points under 10 because of the hype of what people thought they saw last week.
Chris, what do you think?
Well, this is my best bet of the weekend. It's Kansas City. So RC is right. When I first saw that 7.5, I put it in the chat that's not the line. That's not the right line for this game. And I think for a good part, it really was all over the place, the line for this game early in the week. DraftKings was as high as 8.5, but FanDuel was kind of stubbornly staying at 7.5. And I think it was because we're anchored by the game that they just played a month ago, where Houston was at Kansas City, and the line when at kickoff, it was Houston was getting 3.5. I think that was right around when there was some uncertainty about Mahomes, not that he wouldn't play, but his injury. And I think that all the things that RC said to recap that game are right. When I think about the way I thought about Chargers Texans, I thought about it as a game where someone's got to win. I don't care if they win by 1 or I don't care if they win by 20. They're likely not winning this round, the divisional round. And so for me, I look and say it was Houston. Again, they earned it, but also when we did poorly on our props last week, but 2 that we mentioned that came in was Bosa and Mack got a sack. Khalil Mack got 2. And here's the thing, the Houston offensive line is not good. And the Kansas City defensive line is very good. So now they're taking a bad offensive line on the road. They kind of had some fortunate breaks to take control of that game, because early on it looked like the Chargers were the ones that, they were playing well but not putting points on the board. So that's always a scary proposition if things turn on you. And then I think the reaction, I heard people say Houston has a Super Bowl caliber it was TJ Watt, but still a Super Bowl caliber defense. I heard on a podcast, Teddy Covers said since 1963, there's only been 4 teams that had 4 interceptions, 4 sacks, and a pick 6. So it's happened 4 times. The last 3 won the Super Bowl, but the one before didn't. So what happened with that team? And so because Houston did that in that game. So I think this game is not about Houston. It's about Kansas City. And we still have the idea in our mind that Kansas City wasn't covering spreads, but this is a team that's won 2, back-to-back Super Bowls, and they're playing a regular season, winning all their games, just not by margin. But the last 3 times they've been favorites, they won and covered all of them. And 2 of those were against playoff teams. So I think Kansas City comes out ready. Like the last time we saw them was Mahomes and Kelsey and the big prime capes that they gave out, the coats, and then Andy Reid popped out as Santa Claus. But this is a team that's completely buttoned up, and I heard people saying they haven't played in 24 days. It's like, I don't think Mahomes is going to have a problem not having thrown a pass in 24 days. There's definitely talent on Houston's defense, but that performance was overblown. In fact, Houston has a great result, but they were underdogs at home in the first round of the playoffs against the Chargers. So absolutely, I say they should be getting plenty of points at the Chiefs, and it's still not enough for me. So we can't. It's not fair or fun for the audience to listen to the great line that we got, but. I'd give up the point and take 8.5. I was checking around. It looks like 8.5, pretty solid everywhere right now. Obviously, if I like the 8.5, and I do, I think this is a great game to tease right now. Get it down to 2.5. And we'll talk about finding something to pair with that. But I love that. I don't, and I feel like if Houston stays within 8 points of the Chiefs, you can have my money. That's a very fair proposition that I'm willing to enter into because I was also listening to people talk about the fact that Houston's a very good first half team. If this goes the way, some crazy way where Houston scores a touchdown, I'm sure the line's only going to go to Chiefs minus 7.5, but I'll be ready to bet it in game 2. If there's anything like that, because I'm sure by the end of the game, we win this thing by 10 plus.
So this is Patrick Mahomes' third lowest game total of his career, which is interesting. So he had the game total here is 41. It's the lowest of the weekend too. So just wanted to throw that out there. Chris, I really like your point about the offensive line and defensive line mismatch here. I know you and RC were kind of on that with your Bosa and Mac prop bets against that Houston O-line, but now you're on the road. You're going up against the back-to-back Super Bowl champions, and it felt like in that playoff game where they were a home underdog, they had a chip on their shoulder. They were sort of kind of playing that card that they've been hearing all the chirping all week with Rex Ryan on ESPN saying this is a bye week for the Chargers. So now they don't have that. Now it's not like their backs are up against the wall. They're on the road in one of the toughest places to play in 22 degrees like that. That's not going to be easy for a team that plays indoors.
It helps that they were just there a few, not very long ago. I think that helps a bit. But yeah, where they weren't was a divisional round with a team that no one's been impressed with this entire year. And now after this one game, someone, again, it's JJ Watt, but saying it's a Super Bowl caliber defense and getting over the moon. I'm not there. I like Stroud. I like a lot of the pieces on this team, but what I don't like is the offensive line play. And Mahomes and the offense get their share of attention because he's a superstar. But let's not forget that this Chiefs defense is really the strength of the team at this point.
And look no further to last year where the Texans won a wild card game that no one expected them to. A lot of people were picking the Browns, and then they go and get waxed by Baltimore 34-10 on the road. So when this team goes outdoors into these crazy hostile environments against these Super Bowl caliber teams, it feels like that's when they really start folding. RC, the biggest ticket discrepancy, money versus ticket discrepancy, is between the Texans and KC. So there's 12% more money than tickets on here. Do you also view this as your best bet, or is there another game you like better?
This would be my best bet, and I would like to add two things into the mix about this game. First, the notion that the Texans have a Super Bowl caliber defense is ridiculous. Just because they had a good game against the Chargers, in which heavy turnovers, which they've only had one turnover in their 3 games prior, and some of these turnovers from Herbert were passes right to his receivers that they couldn't handle, fell down. I think Disley had one right in his hands that he just pitched over to the DB behind him. But the recent Texans results before the Chargers playoff game, if you ignore Week 18 because Week 18 is ridiculous, they gave up 31 to Baltimore, getting clocked. They gave up 27 to the Chiefs, and the Chiefs were handling them the whole game. Um, they held Miami to 12 points. That was a good game. That was the game where Tua all of a sudden started throwing interceptions, kind of like Justin Herbert. Like it didn't make any sense what Tua was doing. But okay, they had a good game against Tua. They gave up 20 to Mac Jones, but they then before that, week 12, they gave up 32 to Tennessee. Tennessee, one of the worst offenses out there. And if you remember, and I remember dearly, because Will Levis completely spanked that defense. Um, they held Dallas to 10 before that, but then they gave up 26 to the Lions. They give up 25 plus points routinely, and the games where they don't, it's usually against bad offenses. So I don't buy this as a top defense. It's definitely not a top offense, but I would also add that this week will be the best Kansas City Chiefs team that will be fielded in the 2024 season. I'm not a big Chiefs guy. I see holes in them, especially at the beginning of the year when they got a lot of lucky wins and a lot of late breaks to get that win streak going. Where that team was to where this team is now, this is a very dangerous, very loaded Kansas City team. I mean, they got DeAndre Hopkins, obviously, but just having him and then getting Marquise Brown back, then getting Isaiah Pacheco, but landing Kareem Hunt, who's been one of the better running backs in the NFL. So now they have a running back duo. They have multiple wide receivers. Before early in the season, it was Justin Watson, Rashee Rice, and then Rice went down. So they were Justin Watson. Worthy was looking shaky. They were getting by. Then all of a sudden they acquire Hopkins. Brown comes back. Boom, this offense is starting to roll. They got a running back duo. They're in really good shape. They have a shaky offensive line, but the weapons are now better than they've ever had, healthiest they've ever had. And for this season, Chris Jones took a couple of weeks off. He's practicing in full. I mean, that as he goes, the defense goes. The defense is the healthiest it's been. They've had, multiple weeks off. I just think this is the perfect setup for them to roll right back to the Super Bowl with the way this season is playing out. And I hate saying that. I'm not a big Chiefs guy, but this looks like a very dangerous Chiefs team now.
Well, I look at this also and say this is not even the biggest line of the weekend, but I know there's people out there who say Baltimore is their highest rated team. How can you argue with Baltimore, KC, Buffalo? I'm maybe, or Detroit. I'm not even going to debate that. Aside to say that the Chiefs are in that conversation and in serious consideration for the best team in the league. And you tell me, from the 8 teams left, there seems to be exactly one to me that's not like the others. And again, if you're a Houston fan, my problem is specifically the offensive line. That is something that's very hard to overcome. And you're playing an excellent defensive line, so that is a mismatch, and it's totally exaggerated when you go on the road. So last week they had a bad offensive line at home, and it still got knocked around. Now you go on the road. So I feel like it's maybe the best team left versus the worst team left, and you don't even have the biggest line of the weekend.
All really good points. Are there any props that you guys are looking at this weekend? Or I should say for this game in particular?
This was as I was looking through each game for prop bets all this week, I really didn't come up with any. I threw just a couple of low dollar things on it just for interest's sake, but Kansas City has gone from predictable, where it used to be just you could rely on Pacheco being the lead running back, and then whether it was Rashee Rice, that there was a stretch where it was DeAndre Hopkins, Then Worthy started to come around. You had I thought I'd had a decent feel and made a lot of good money on Xavier Worthy coming down the stretch. But once Marquise Brown come back, and I think Marquise Brown is Patrick Mahomes' favorite wide receiver. Once he came back, now it's almost unpredictable where these targets are going. DeAndre Hopkins facing Houston, I don't know if there's a thing that's going to be with that. And he has a very low prop because he hasn't really been playing that many snaps. But Hopkins has a low yardage. It's like 28 yards. So I put just a little bit on that and a little bit on Brown and a little bit on Worthy because I think 2 out of the 3 of them can hit. But if you made me do one or if you made me pick one to bet heavy, I just don't. I can't figure out the Chiefs. They've got too many weapons now to try to figure out. So I don't have anything. The Kansas City sacks I'm interested in, but they don't have a ton of guys available listed at any decent odds that maybe jump out at it. And then I've seen some excitement for John Mechie to be a thing for Houston, especially if they get down, that they're going to have to throw to somebody, not Nico Collins. I see it. I see he's had some spike games, but he also disappears. He's also not very good. So I could see putting a light amount on Mechie for fun, but I don't. My favorite bet of this game is if you said, "Hey, here's a grand, go spend it on anything on this game," I would just buy the minus 8.5 with the Chiefs. I wouldn't play any player props.
What about the tight ends, RC? Do you see Stover or Schultz doing anything against the Chiefs defense?
The Chiefs have been notoriously not good against the tight end, but every time I think that, and you apply it to Houston, where it looks like Houston has a favorable situation, Schultz doesn't really come through. The last time they played, Schultz had a touchdown. I don't think he hit his prop yardage, but he got like a 20-yard touchdown when it was a broken play. Stroud was scrambling around, and he just happened to find Schultz in desperation wide open in the end zone on an extended play touchdown. Outside of that, he wasn't really – they didn't go into – I thought they were going to go into that game and go, man, we got a real opportunity to expose Kansas City with our tight ends because that's what everybody seems to be doing. And then they didn't do it. So I'm going to assume they're probably not going to do it again. The Stroud's numbers have been way down. This game's going to be super cold. They could just run it at each other. I'm having a hard time liking anything from this from a prop betting side.
Chris, any final thoughts before we move on to the next game?
My only prop thoughts are, Hopkins is over 3-1 to score a touchdown, and the idea that, I do agree. You've got now the maximum number of people to choose from for targets, but just the former team is always a strong angle. You can see it even, and I haven't shopped it completely, but FanDuel was plus 320, and then 2 touchdowns was 31-1. Now it's a long shot for a little bit to get a big payoff, but I think it could be worth it just for that angle. I do agree with RC. You're going to see people have a bigger role than Hopkins, but maybe he's the red zone situation. And then the other thing I was looking at is, Pacheco, when he came back after a couple of weeks, I thought he would now kind of take over the backfield like he had before. But I think that there's an appreciation for the work that Kareem Hunt has done, and they're going to keep him involved just because, if nothing else, just a thank you. But also he's done well also.
I don't even know that it's keep him involved situation. I think they have Hunt on the same level as Pacheco, the way that they're using him down the stretch.
And you're back in the, Pacheco, you're back, but it's a pretty serious injury he came back from. So if he's 85%, with what he's going to be opening day next week. It's in their own interest for the franchise to keep Hunt involved. So when I look at the two of them, Pacheco's 41.5 yards and rushing, and Kareem Hunt's 31.5. So if I was going to play any prop, I would go Hunt over 31.5, because I do agree that he's not going anywhere, and another week off for Pacheco, I don't think they're just going to flip to he gets 16 to 20 carries. I think it's going to be like, maybe like 12 to 10. I'm not even sure who gets more. And 31 yards is not bad when you're looking at, the Chiefs line and rushing game. So those are my final thoughts in terms of player props. I might have some, it's early in the week. Those are kind of the, something might hit me like a bolt of lightning, but I really haven't had any big idea prop bets. The Hopkins thing is probably the thing I'm most excited about. But, Andrew, you mentioned before, this is the third lowest total of Mahomes' career. So you don't want to be putting a bunch of money out there on overs or players to score a touchdown when you're expected to have 41 points. How many touchdowns are the Chiefs line to score? 2, and so one of them's got to get. That's probably why you're getting the plus. But we got an angle. Eventually, I think people are going to start talking about the angle of Hopkins versus the old team. But then again, we're trying to get into Andy Reid and Nagy's head. Do they care? Or are they after something bigger?
Yeah, that's a good point. It'll be fun. That's a fun bet to just see if Hopkins scores against his old team. But I like the point that you guys brought up about Hunt and how he's being used down the stretch, because I think when Pacheco was coming back, a lot of people, including myself, thought, oh, he's just gonna reclaim his role as the lead dog. But now Hunt's being mixed in, and maybe Casey's looking at some other teams in the NFL that are using a running back by committee approach like a Detroit, and they want to kind of keep both fresh. So
well, let me just say one more thing just off of that. I was just peeking at the rushing and receiving yards combined, the alternate rushing and receiving yards. Hunt to get 50 yards rushing and receiving is plus 145. 60 yards is plus 240. So that's either or. Mm-hmm. And he gets screen passes. You guys could, I don't have his game logs up, but he catches the ball, and so that seems like for a total combined yards for a 1A running back in a freezing cold game, that doesn't seem like it doesn't seem unattainable. It actually seems like maybe we're getting a pretty good. I haven't shopped it around to the different books. You might be getting a deal there at even just say 50 yards rushing and receiving, 145. That's plus odds. I think I would have guessed the lower number.
No, that's certainly interesting. Okay.
I just go ahead, RC. I don't like games like this from a prop betting standpoint where my mind starts going to just watching Casey since they've assembled this talent and Marquise Brown has come back, and how Hunt is being used more than Pacheco. I have no feeling. I just don't know whether Mahomes is going to come out and Hopkins is going to play a lot more snaps than he had been, because he'd only been playing like a third of the snaps. And I think they're just managing him. It wouldn't surprise me if all of a sudden he played 50 to 60% of the snaps in a playoff game, because they're just saving them and getting them ready. And now here comes the planned for Chiefs attack with all of these weapons, and we're going to start playing Hopkins heavy. Or is Mahomes going to defer to what I think his favorite target is, Marquise Brown? Or are they going to continue to push this Xavier Worthy thing because he's the one that gets the least amount of coverage and is a big play in a bottle waiting to happen? I don't know which direction they're going to go. So the props are kind of priced properly. I'm sure one or two of them are going to blow their numbers away. I just don't know which one it's going to be, and I hate having that feeling where I don't know if this is where Pacheco gets treated like he used to be. I don't know if this is Hunt continues to be on an even scale, or maybe even gets more carries or touches than Pacheco. So I'm really laying back and not taking anything seriously on props, but I am taking the whole Kansas City team seriously for a bet, minus the spread, minus the 8.5, 7.5, 9, whatever it's going to be.
Good point. Okay, let's go to the next game. Commanders are going into Detroit. They're coming off a crazy win against Tampa Bay on, I believe it was Sunday Night Football. Detroit's favored by 9.5. The over/under there is 55, which is the highest of the weekend. And the game will be played at 8 Eastern. Obviously, no weather to worry about since the Lions play in a dome. So my pick in this one, guys, I'm going with Commanders plus 9.5. Chris, who do you think takes this game against the spread?
Well, I think this is not just because we've got a really high total, but for other reasons, this is the most, this is the game that has, I think, the most variance. So initially I was thinking the same thing as you, Andrew, is take the points because you've got, I don't know who it was that called, Washington. It's almost like a junior version of Detroit, how much they go for it on fourth down. I think I heard it last week that they have the most points in the league on drives in which they converted a fourth down. So with that kind of volatility, you could see Detroit, you could see a scenario easily where Detroit wins the game by 25, or you could see if the variance goes against Detroit on fourth down, which they have great success. And I don't think the Washington's defense is really anything that special. But Detroit's isn't either. They got the Vikings, and then you see what happened to the Vikings the very next week. So I think it's interesting. It doesn't mean that I automatically think over because, again, the fourth down variance, if you drive all the way down the field and you miss your fourth down on the 13-yard line, now the other team's driving the other way, and that can lead to an under. So I think there's just a huge amount of variance in the game. Based on that, I'd probably, lean with the points. But I don't think that I'll say my thought on this game is if Detroit wins and covers the spread, I'll be enthusiastically against them next week. I think they're already too high and out of a range, but certainly if they cover a playoff game, now we're into something. That, in fact, that would be what I'd say with this game. If Detroit wins and covers, if they win and don't cover, then this is not a thing. But if they win and cover the spread, win by 10 points, I would be looking for the lines to pop up on Sunday night for next week's game, and I would take Detroit's opponent in the NFC Championship game against the spread with the points.
RC, Chris alluded to the Lions D not looking so great. If we remove the 9 points that Minnesota threw up in that last regular season game in December, Lions gave up 31 against Green Bay, who doesn't look all that great. They gave up 48 against Buffalo, who obviously they have a high-powered offense, 17 against Chicago, and 34 against San Francisco. RC, do you think that this defense could hold up against the Commanders?
It's up for debate. My whole thing with this game is that whatever anybody says about the Washington side or the Detroit side, I can agree with. I can see this being too many points. I can see them going. These are the two teams that are fourth down crazy, and I mean that in a good way. Dan Quinn is trying to copy the Dan Campbell model and going for it and training his team to go for it in these tough situations. And like Chris was saying, you live that way, you start to change drives, you start to change momentums of games, and Detroit usually has the upper hand in that. But let's say Washington gets out, however it happens, they get out to a 7-0 lead, Detroit gets the ball back, they get themselves in a 4th and 3. So then Dan Campbell's going to do a Dan Campbell, and let's say he goes for it, but there's a bad snap or something happens, and all of a sudden Washington stops them, gets the ball back in good shape, goes down and maybe gets off to a 10-0 lead. This whole game takes on a completely different complexion, not only for the cover standpoint, but just in the game itself. I don't know if Detroit would start to pucker up at that point. If Dan Campbell won't start going for fourth downs, it may invigorate Dan Quinn to go for more fourth. So I could see a path of Washington just winning this game outright. I can also see a path where Detroit completely blows their doors off, because this is where teams who were lower seeded, have a big upset win, go play the team that's the great team that's coming off a bye. This is where they go and get their doors blown off, like the Texans last year when they upset win and then go play. Everybody gets excited, then they go play the Ravens and get killed. Rookie quarterback, all of that. So I could see this going either way. My gut says take the 9.5, but my head starts to say Detroit's a team of destiny, and whatever they need to do, they're gonna whack lesser teams. And I don't know that Washington is there yet to be having a lot of confidence in on the road in a big spot like this. So my main bet is I'm not touching it.
In the playoffs is where you don't see the backdoor covers with the same frequency as you see it during the season. So that's a big part of taking the points with a 9.5, especially with a 55 point total. So, you still look at a Lions team that, and I agree, this is a kind of the Lions are better than Washington for sure, and they've scored 31 points in at least 31 points in each of the last 5 games. So, you're going to have to, if you're Washington, you're going to have to see a game where potentially both teams are in the 30s, or maybe someone's even in the low 40s if Washington's going to win this game, because it's not like they can go into Detroit with anything special on defense. And my expectation is not that Washington slows Detroit down at all in this game. And so that's why I almost feel like the least likely outcome is Detroit wins and doesn't cover. I think Washington could have maybe a 15% chance that they win the game, and or 20% chance they win the game. Maybe there's a 15% chance that it lands, Detroit wins but doesn't cover, and then what are we left with? 65% that Detroit blows them away, which seems like the likely outcome. In this round, the favorites, I heard the favorites were like 45%, the big favorites over a touchdown, but it's going to take, I was looking at this game thinking Washington's going to need turnovers to stay in this game, but the fourth down non-conversions, that kind of essentially is a turnover. So I just feel like there's so much variance that absolutely Detroit can win the game by 30. Can Washington win it? Well, yeah, we're talking about a game with probably 9 turnovers if you count those fourth downs, or maybe not, maybe 1 turnover if they convert them all. So it'll be fun to watch, but that makes it hard to bet.
And I think towards the end of the last game, guys, I don't know if you caught this, Tampa Bay's rushing attack was really starting to get through that Washington front line, and that has been their weakness all season. I fully expect Detroit, they're gonna nonstop try to run that ball. I think Montgomery is probably coming back for this game, but even with just Gibbs and that offensive line, they're going to definitely control the line battle on that side of the ball. But one stat that I wanted to share with you guys that I pulled off of VSiN, wanted to get your guys' thoughts on it. Returning playoff teams that played a team that hasn't been in the playoffs the year prior are 7-16 against the spread. And that kind of held up last week, where Washington went up against Tampa Bay and obviously beat them, right? And, Tampa was in there last year, Washington wasn't. Do you guys think that The so if Detroit wins, do you guys think that Gibbs and Montgomery are going to go crazy on this Washington rush D, or can you guys see Goff having a big game through the air as well?
I don't see Washington's advantage in any way. I think Detroit gets what they want. I was just looking, their team total's 33.5, and I mean, if they're not a good rush defense, you know what the Lions can do. This offensive line is tremendous. You know you're going to have a commitment to the run because Montgomery's back, so you're going to want to see both of the guys now out there with their, whatever they call it, with the Sonic guys. But with that Veasan stat, Andrew, that was any round of the playoffs? Because I think the wild card round and the divisional round are so different.
That's what I was going to ask and say. Obviously, that they probably didn't give that split, but I could see that very much last round, but not this round when those teams that did. I'd be interested to see those teams that did get the upset when they go to the next round to play, especially the bye team, number 1 seed, what their records are when they get that win. It's almost like they get that upset win. Like, I think Washington will consider this season a success. Houston will kind of consider this season a success, getting this far if they get whacked this round. But I don't think Kansas City or Detroit are going to take this lightly, where I think Washington is just happy to be here.
I saw a couple of trends that were kind of like we were just talking about. So if you are in Washington's scenario where they went on the road and got a win in the first round of the playoffs, and now they're taking on a team off the bye, it's last handful of years, didn't say when it was as of. In that case, the home team's 11-14. So that's 44%, but that's not a big sample size. I mean, the sample size is small and the edge is not big. 11-14 is a rounding error. You don't expect 25
11-14
games
against the spread.
Against the spread. So it would be Detroit in that case, 11-14 against the spread.
Divisional round.
Yes.
Wow.
But
I wouldn't have guessed that. I would have thought it would have been way in the other direction.
I know, because I thought the divisional. Well, actually, when we looked at the wild card round last week, remember the 7+ point favorites had a tremendous record. The Bills and Baltimore winning brought it to 13-1. But in this round, those over a touchdown favorites are 45% against the spread. And that surprises me based on what I remember of these games, because you think about maybe it's only Houston, because every year I can remember them going to the divisional round and getting crushed by somebody. And maybe the other teams don't. I don't know. But the other thing was, if you win as a road underdog, which, Washington, I think it's important to remember when you look at these games, Washington was getting points at Tampa Bay.
Mm-hmm.
So getting 9.5 at Detroit, it doesn't seem like such a great bargain when you consider they were getting 2.5 at Tampa Bay. But if you win as an underdog and are playing a team off a bye, that's even 7-11, which is 39% against the spread. And my thing with, if you have something that's 39%, that's pretty good. But 7-11 is just, also how far you going back, or you cherry picking the numbers. 7-11, because 18 games, you would expect 7-11. That's within the range of what you'd expect. You don't expect, if you're flipping coins, it's not going to come out 50% over a short sample size. So I guess I don't jump up and down over 7-11 or 11-14, those two separate things that were going on. I think it's interesting to just note what it's been historically. Like, RC, you were a bit surprised by it, and Andrew, probably you too. But my biggest take, because I'll enjoy the game. I think they're gonna. We talked about the turnovers, the fourth down non-conversions being turnovers. I still think they're going to score a ton of points. They're going to score a lot of points because I think people were talking about Washington and saying the amount of conversions that they have on fourth downs is not sustainable. But you have Jaden Daniels, it's not an accident. It's kind of like when Philly started going for it and they had the tush push. It is a little bit of a unique advantage to have Jaden Daniels because he's running for those, and other people are trying to do other things to get those. I believe he can continue to do it against Detroit's defense. So I think it will be a lot of points, and if if you're looking, again, we haven't really dug into the props, but this is a game where you want to have a bingo card, touchdown, score, or parlay. This is your game. I think it lives up to the 55.5. Some of the, the wild card games did not. I could definitely see this being a college football type score fest.
And before I ask RC and you, Chris, about like your if there are any props you like in particular, just to correct the stat I gave out from VSiN, that 7-16 against the spread is for the divisional round. It's for when the home team is a favorite in the single digits, so less than 10 points, which is the case here. But I mean, it's barely there. I mean, 9.5 and 10. That's a pretty it's right there. So I don't know how much you guys want to read into that. I just found that to be interesting, especially in that round.
Yeah,
makes me even more not want to bet this.
Yeah, and don't forget, like when you talk about those trends, it's going to be based on the closing line. So we don't know if this game applies or not. This could easily be 10.5 when it kicks off on Saturday night.
Yeah, I mean it's hovering between 9.5 and 10, I think, right now. So
I think it blows through. I don't think you're going to see a ton of
9.5s.
Washington. Yeah, I don't know if you're going to see the Washington. I mean, it gets to 9.5 to stop the teasers to get under their field goal.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, RC, let's start with you. Are there any specific players that caught your interest in this game?
What my plan is with this game, it's not white hot for me, but it's a little hotter than anything that was going on in Houston KC. I don't often play props. My wheelhouse is typically not trying to guess whether the stars are going to have a star-like game. I'm usually trying to find underneath the radar type players that I've got a great feel for that the sports books don't. But in this case, I'm betting the Gibbs rushing plus receiving over, and Terry McLaurin's receiving yards over, because I think it's going to be a game of stars. I agree with Chris. It's going to live up to the high scoring, because Detroit doesn't have that good of a defense, but somewhat on purpose, the injuries have hurt them. But they play a style where they take chances, and they know if they get beat, just like their fourth down and go for it style, they take chances on defense, and if they get burned, they don't really care. That doesn't send them into a tailspin. They're like, well, we're just going to go out and score a touchdown in return, and then we'll go back to attacking on defense and going forward on fourth downs. We don't care if we give up a big play. The entire NFL is designed to do two things. One, to push food, like Matthew McConaughey says, and two is to live to not give up a big play. That's all teams, I think, the goal is in every game, is to not give up a big play. That's why they've all adopted this cover two, play back, let everything happen in front of them, try to hold them out when they get close to the red zone or into the red zone. But the Lions don't play that way. So I think they don't get cute and try to do ends around or try to do like the Broncos did and put Troy Franklin in for a lot of snaps and try to get him the ball when he's been a failure most of the season. They're not gonna try to trick Washington. They're gonna come at him with Gibbs, and I think just like last week when the chips were on the line, and it's hard to run against Tampa Bay, it's easier to throw. Jaden Daniels was all over Terry McLaurin, especially in the first part of that game. I think he does the same thing here against Detroit. So I'm going with the stars, which is rare for me, McLaurin and Gibbs. I see people are getting into De'Ami Brown because they saw last week He had a big performance, so now everybody's going to want that repeat. That very well could happen. But before that, it was Zacchaeus that was having the big games. And then we all tried to jump in on that wave, and it wasn't a one game wave, it was a multi game wave. And then all of a sudden, that wave crashed just short of the catch and the yards props to our chagrin because De'Ami Brown all of a sudden got the hot hand. It's usually with Washington, it's going to be McLaurin, and then you don't know what they're going to do otherwise, whether it was going to be Noah Brown when he was there, whether it's going to be a Zach Ertz event, whether now De'Ami Brown or Zacchaeus is going to have his bounce back. That last week was just a little, sidebar, and now he's going to get back to getting a ton of targets. I don't know what's going to happen for the second most targeted player, but I do know McLaurin is going to be the first most targeted player, and you can get over on Detroit throwing the ball. So I think that's going to happen. May even bring me to betting Jaden Daniels passing yards over, figuring that they will be down and or chasing, that there's never going to be a world where Washington gets up by 2 scores and tries to sit on it. I don't think that's Dan Quinn. I think 25 plus other NFL head coaches would think they have Detroit on the ropes if they got up 10-0. But I think Dan Quinn knows he's got to score 25, 30 points to have a shot in this game. So there's going to be a lot of offense in this game, whether it's Washington trying to stay ahead or Washington gets way down and now it's on. They're going to have to throw.
Chris, what are you thinking with the props in this one?
Well, RC hit something that was a big takeaway from me from Wildcard Weekend, and I was sorry that I was a week late on having this thought, but it's definitely on my list now of a summer research project, because RC said it last week, and I know that's been his real success in props this season, in the regular season, and even said so last week that it's the lesser used players that RC has more knowledge of than the sports book. So when they throw a lineup right before the game for all the rest of the players, that's when you can really pounce. But I'll tell you, it's not just Terry McLaurin. It was every number 1 receiver for every team in every game last week. And they were way over their totals. I mean, think McConkey, but every number 1 receiver for every team. So what I wanted to do is think about or look back at the box scores and do the research on playoffs, and then see if there's any difference between a quarterback making a first start versus a quarterback who's been around for a while. Maybe they, making their first start might lean on those top receivers more. But it was Puka. It was everybody, every number 1 receiver in every game. Nico Collins. It was all of them. So, the idea of put that in the notes to shift. We're picking off these great props throughout the season. When Wild Card Weekend comes, it's time to shift to the guy who's got X percentage of the production of the offense. I mean, we know who the number 1 receivers are, but is there just kind of dig into the numbers and see if we can get.
And are they legit number 1 wide, like Baltimore? Who's Baltimore's number 1 wide receiver?
Yeah, and
that's Flowers out. You don't know. The Bills don't even use a number 1 wide receiver anymore. But
right,
Nico Collins, Puka.
And that was my thought: is can we quantify it somehow? Okay, they've got 25% of the production. Somehow quantify it. Maybe it's going to be a lower number than that, a threshold. But is there some criteria because if we're going to go back and back test, it can't just be. We know Nico Collins is the number 1 guy. We have to have a way to quantify it. So that's on the summer research project list, because that's something that how that is going to go. The props come out. These are going to be guys that get bet over because they're the top players. So it's got to be a Wednesday when you see it, hit it, because we've done the research, and then because the number is going to climb from there. But but the research we're going to do is going to be on the closing number, which is going to be even higher. So if we have a good success, then we know we're getting the best of it. So I was regretting not doing that, but that's what I was thinking on Monday night is we got to see if this is a thing. So on this game, do I have any, specific player? No, but I do like the idea of a lot of offense. So this is a good prop game. I almost think this is one where, you can throw a dart because here you're fishing in a pond of overs where most games in the playoffs, most games in the regular season, you're fishing in the pond of unders.
Yeah, and Chris, just to add to your point too, I think it also extends beyond the receivers here. A wild card weekend, we saw Henry go crazy. We saw Barkley, I think, got close to 120 rushing yards, and he could have even had a long touchdown, but he slid at the end to just kneel out the game, which was kind of cool. And good teammate does that, to protect from injuries or whatever. James Cook went crazy. So like all of these like number one running back receiving options, I think that would be a really cool project just to see if there's any trend or anything like that with wild card weekend. Do people start the thing that caught me the most off guard, and I know this is getting into another game, was James Cook, I think, had close to 20 carries by half, whereas like they barely let the guy run in the first half during the regular season. Now like just feels like teams are going to commit more to the run during the playoffs as well.
Yeah, I think about that with quarterbacks too. I think they're going to run more. We lost on Russell Wilson last week, but maybe that's why they lost by 2 touchdowns. A good team that's executing a good plan. Teams that won, last week, if you think about, maybe Stafford would be the exception, but the winning teams, the quarterbacks ran.
Yeah.
I mean, a couple of them are clearly running quarterbacks, but I'm saying they went over their rushing total, even if they were rushing quarterbacks.
Yep, good point. RC, Chris, anything else before we go to the next one?
Yeah, I just want to throw one more player out that could be an X factor, that is a player that we've made some really good money on prop betting wise, but this might be the type of the game that's right in his wheelhouse, and he may be underpriced a bit, or the line may be under because he's had a choppy last 5 or 6 weeks because he's been injured and different factors. This could be an Austin Eckler game, because if it gets into a race and chase game, he'll be in a lot getting the screen passes. He could be the little twist that Washington has to stay in this game. I can't see Washington being a boring, run-heavy Brian Robinson event. He may get his touches, he may get his props, but I think this game is going to beg for a bunch of Austin Eckler, just like it did last week. Eckler had been quiet, partly because of injury, but 3 catches. He almost had the same amount of snaps played as Brian Robinson, which is unusual compared to most games that they played together in. 3 catches, 26 yards in the passing game for Eckler. I think he could maybe even double that this week.
And they weren't really chasing last week too. I mean, it was a pretty close game.
Yeah, they were playing pretty normal Washington football last week, but Eckler's always going to get touches in games, but if they get hopelessly down or they start sliding away from them, you could see a lot of Eckler in this game.
And RC, you're saying receiving yards, or are you talking about rushing and receiving?
Receiving yards.
That's what I was thinking. Okay. I mean, his receiving yards on FanDuel at least are 23.5, and you said he was 26 and can get twice that. So that's interesting. I think that makes a lot of sense. In any game state, you could see Eckler involved and catching passes. If it's competitive.
The Eckler 25 plus prop on DraftKings, they have the line at 23.5, but the 25 plus little extra line is -105. It's a little bit better odds. But if it happens, I don't think this is going to be the line is 23 and Eckler gets somewhere between 20 and 30, I think this is going to be Eckler either blows it because Washington decides it's going to be all wide receivers and not waste time with Eckler throwing to running backs, or Eckler has one of those 70 or 80-yard games off of 4, 5, 6 catches. He's either going to blow this away or just miss it.
And you think the receptions are going to be 4 or 5 or 6, something like that, because his 3.5 is his number, and it's plus 142.
Yeah, and that's a spicy line of 3.5 because he usually doesn't get that many catches in games. It's usually around 2 or 3, and usually and it's almost always all screens, designed screens, and he almost always takes one of them for 10 plus yards. Earlier in the season, they kept setting the line on him at 10.5, 12.5, 13, and we were killing it. He'd get it all on one catch in the first quarter, and we'd already have it in the bank. Lately, they've caught on to that. Now they got him up into the 20s, and he really hasn't been blowing numbers away. But I think this game, the way this game might flow, is going to, I think, cause a extra helping of Eckler.
Well, and 55 and a half over under. I mean, you're almost getting a game and a half worth of. You're going to almost 1.3 times all the stats because if you get that much scoring, you're basing the game logs on a regular game. If they score 60 points, that's not a regular game. That's it's a game plus.
That's why De'Ami Brown would be on the board. Zacchaeus would be on the board. If Washington has to rack up a lot of passing numbers, the alternative guys with their low 30s for an over-under yardage number, they could hit that quite easily.
All right. I think that's a good segue into the next game, guys. So that was the last game for Saturday. Sunday afternoon, 3 p.m., we're going to have the Los Angeles Rams going into Philadelphia, where right now it's forecasted to be 37 degrees, 9-mile-per-hour winds. And I think I saw a tweet out there that there could be snow in that game, so we'll watch out for that. But as of now, the Eagles are 5.5 home favorites. Over under here is 44 points, and I think I'm gonna lean with the Rams to cover, but Philly to win. RC, Chris, where are you guys leaning with this one?
I want to see what Chris has up his sleeve for this one. He was excited about this one. You want to close it out with yours, Chris, or you want to put it on the tee?
Well, I'll go, I guess. And so I was mentioning earlier, I mean, most of the audience, they bet the close audience, and I think probably everybody in the, for both, right? It's like Rams, we liked them in the beginning of the season. They gave us a 1-4 start and opportunities to bet them at bigger odds. And I have them at a lot of different odds, but the best is 80-1 to win the NFC. I didn't hedge last week. I liked them. I thought it was a responsible thing to do to at least put something on the Vikings, but I didn't. So I just let it ride. And I thought if I didn't have those futures bets, I would have been taking the Rams plus the points, and I certainly would have been teasing them up. That made too much sense with it at 2 or 2.5. So now we find ourselves 2 wins away from an 80-1 payout. In this case, you got to lay 3-1 to bet the Eagles on the money line. But I think I got to do the math here, but it's a responsible thing to do. You lay 3-1, and then even if against, if they make it to Detroit, you're laying minus 400. You're still way ahead of the game. You're either cashing because they got knocked out, or you're way ahead of the game. So I know we had a school of thought that was, we won so much on the Rams division, we could just let this ride. So that's the other option. You're getting really poorly compensated for the cash out option, but that's another potential, is just cash out 1 or 2 of the futures bets. And I think on the ones that are 80-1, it's 6 times your bet at this point. I'll have to double check that. I can do it right now, but I think it was like a 50 was, cash it out for 300 and kind of that kind of situation, which isn't too bad, but it's not 80. So
Yeah.
that's the way I was looking at this game. So I think if I was looking, so what worries me about this game, or has me a little conflicted, is there was two um, bettors that I really respect: Steve Fezzik, Marco D'Angelo. They're both on the Eagles side, and I haven't really heard a handicap that was compelling. Just sounded like the Eagles had the least impressive win wild card weekend, and so they're undervalued. And maybe I could see the case because the look ahead hypothetical for this game was 6.5. Then it was 6. Now I see it's creeping to 5.5. So in that case, yeah, you're getting discounts with the Eagles. Um, let's not forget what really sparked the Rams' late season drive was the whooping that the Eagles gave them on Sunday Night Football. And before that game, McVay was saying, we want to see if we can be as physical as the Eagles. I'm not sure anyone in the league is as physical as the Eagles. And that was a game. The Eagles didn't go in there and crush them. If you recall, there was a play where Jared Verse put Mailata on his back. Another play where the tight end caught the ball and lowered his shoulder and knocked Slay out of the game. Like both teams, that was the game with the biggest hits that I've seen this entire season. And RC, you've seen them all, so maybe you can say how physical you thought it was, because I haven't seen every game. But that's what really I think gave the Rams because it's a young, for the most part, you're talking about a pretty young team with the Rams. I think that was a measuring stick game to say we're not there yet, and it helped them in the Minnesota game, and it helped them down the stretch. Because a couple weeks later they played Buffalo, they played a tough game against San Francisco. They went outdoors in a cold day, colder than this game's going to be, and played the Jets. Now the Jets aren't great, okay, but it was a terrible spot for the Rams, and they pulled out the win, and they didn't do a Miami Dolphins going to Green Bay. They actually played outside. So that has me less concerned. And at the time of that Jets game, I was saying on the podcast, this is the game that is going to give me some insight if this team has to go to Philly. And now they do. So I was hoping they'd go to Detroit as a Rams future better. I wanted Detroit. But if you got to be in both, then okay, here we go to Philly. So as far as picking a side, I think if I was uninvolved, I'd be scared that people are on the Philly side. But I also think we had Philly last week, and I get that the Rams were in a good I guess spot against the Vikings. But I guess my core belief is that we believe in the Rams in a way that others don't. And there's nothing I saw last week that makes me think the Rams can't play with Philadelphia. And if there is, a couple of Eagles were hurt last week, and we still haven't seen good performance. It's a very much a question mark of what's going on with Jalen Hurts. And so the Rams are not going to be pushovers, and I think they're better suited to play this game at Philadelphia because of that Sunday Night Football game.
RC, what do you think?
I'm with the Rams +6 very nervously because I'm too, like Chris was saying, I'm too vested in the Rams to probably see straight. But if I back up and just try to, as I was doing earlier today, just trying to go through the data and my information, just thinking about the game and where these teams have been at in the recent 4 or 5 weeks. Like when you look at Houston, Kansas City, I can't even conceive of a world of Houston winning that game. You look at Washington, Detroit, I really can't see why. I mean, I have more faith that Washington could win than I do Houston, but I'm not really thinking. I think it's a lot of things would have to go right to have Washington win that game. But then you look at the Rams Eagles, and I'm like, why is this point spread 6? The Rams are one of the hottest teams in the NFL with an emerging defense, just like the Eagles have a really good defense. The Rams probably have the second best defense in the NFL right now. Um, there's no great advantage one way or the other at quarterback. You respect Jalen Hurts, you respect Matthew Stafford. You go, well, the Eagles have this great offensive line. Well, the Rams have a great offensive line with everybody back healthy now. So I think the Eagles are getting credit for possessing Saquon Barkley, just like the Ravens get credit for possessing Lamar Jackson because those are everybody's favorite players. And then subsequently, as Chris, I think, mentioned, people still underestimate the Rams. They think that the Rams are a joke for even being here. Um, but they just continue to go out and take care of business. And I'm scared every week as a bettor of them when it looked like all hope was getting to be lost. Then they started winning games and winning games. And I'm like, coming down the stretch, I'm like, man, I don't know. This Jets game looks like a trap going to the cold Northeast for the Rams. This is a trap. They're going to lose this game. Like, I already marked it down for a loss and was trying to look ahead at the Seattle and Arizona games going, I don't know if Arizona's could win the division if they win that game. I don't know. I'm like, I keep getting nervous about quote unquote my Rams, but they just keep going out and winning. And with the Minnesota game, I was like, this is where this is where Kevin O'Connell comes up with a plan to not let what happened week 18 with the Lions happen in the Ram games. That's going to happen. The Rams don't have the same grit that the Lions do. There's no Minnesota coming off of a bad loss. This is a bounce back week. Like, everything screams Minnesota as a scared bettor trying to look around every corner for the boogeyman. I do that every week with the Rams, and then they just go out and they win all the spots. They never had in the second half. I don't think they've had a letdown, with the exception there was probably one game in there that they lost that was a little weird, but I don't know why there's such a pent up disbelief in the Rams. I get that the Eagles are good as well, but 6 points, that's a lot of points. I don't think these two teams are separated by 6 points, even at home, even in the cold. I just don't. These are two teams that kind of mirror each other. It's just the Eagles have more sexy players like Saquon, and everybody underestimates the Rams like they did last year. And I just don't think you underestimate this team. Playing them a second time, having already played them once, but that was when the Rams were just started. The Rams lost by 17 to them at home, but the Rams were just starting to get cranked up to go on this run when they lost there. So I could see them coming off hot off of just waxing Minnesota, that they can go in and win this game. I can see the Rams winning this game. That's why I look at the 6 and I'm going, I'll take the 6.
The Rams were winning that Sunday night football game until just before halftime. I mean, give full credit to the Eagles for winning by 17, because if you recall that game, Saquon had a couple of long runs, and some of the Rams players afterwards were like, that's the best. I mean, Saquon put up a huge game because he had a couple of busts and a couple of long runs. They were really impressed with the offense. Saquon, it was, he put on a show, so I'm not trying to take anything away from Philadelphia. Like, it's you got to play the full game. I'm just saying it wasn't a domination from the start. The Rams were playing with Philadelphia, and they just couldn't hang with it. It showed Philadelphia was one of the teams that are the class of the NFC. That was my takeaway. I mean, that was the expectation going into that game. Measuring stick game for the Rams. It just showed how great Philadelphia is. But if you look after that game, the only game that's the Rams covered 6 games since then. The only one they didn't cover was Arizona. They were a little bit inflated, minus 6.5 at home against Arizona. It was 3.5, bet up to 6.5, and they won it by 4. But otherwise, the Rams have exceeded expectation. And I think it's important. I think it's important to look and say the Rams covering 6 out of 7 afterwards, because what does that mean? It means they're playing well, but it also means that the perception of the Rams is not as good as the team. that's by definition why they're covering spreads. There's an expectation and they're exceeding it week after week after week. So that's the difference between a team like Houston, where we're calling for the bell to toll, and the Rams, who, if they beat Philadelphia, we were talking about the hypothetical look ahead line for this round if the Rams went to Detroit. If the Rams beat Philadelphia, no matter how that game goes, they're not getting 6.5 at Detroit. The line's going to be lower than that because people will look and see the last two games that the Rams played against the Lions were 1 and 2 point games. Now, I did hear someone say that not only did the Eagles beat up on the Rams this year, but they did last year as well. That concerns me. I mean, it's a different team for the Rams, right? But, it's just institutionally, if Philly has their number, it's not different coaching, it's different players. So that's going to make it a tall order. And I didn't look to see if last year's game was in LA or Philadelphia. But
I think everything's been in LA, which is kind of concerning to me. I'm not sure that
that's what I thought too. That's what I thought too, Andrew. Okay, sorry.
I'm only going to add this to it. Just like with the Kansas City Chiefs, I think this is the best Rams team right now than they've had this entire season. There's a gap between the Eagles and the Rams, and when they met mid-season, whatever that gap was, that Philadelphia is the better team, the Rams keep ascending and have closed that gap. I don't know if it's enough for them to confidently pull off the upset, but the gap between these two teams is a lot closer than it's ever been this season because the Rams are on such a ascension trajectory. So, and I can fully see the Rams winning this game. That's why I like this 6 points, and that's no disrespect to the Eagles. If the Eagles end up winning this by 20, I would go, you knew the Rams' the bell was going to toll for them at some point, and it did. But I could also see the Rams just kind of controlling this game, and the Eagles kind of spin out with Sirianni, and McVay outfoxes Sirianni, and if the Rams get a lead and the Eagles start spiraling, this could be a shocking result because this is a good last year's Rams team that went into the playoffs. Their defense was not good. It was smoke and mirrors, and they still almost pulled off the upset against the Lions. This is the best defense they've had in the last couple years, and then it's the best defense that they've had all season is right now, because when they faced Barkley and Barkley had 1 million yards rushing, they were still going through a transition at linebacker. The Rams were getting walked all over in the run games. That Rams team, when they played the Eagles, that Rams defense is totally, I won't say totally different, but is a different thing that's happened. They've made adjustments. They've started to stop the run. They haven't been getting completely, and utterly trashed in the run game. You see, Minnesota tried to establish the run against them. It didn't work. They got Kilo Weatherspoon came in, and now he's back playing well again, starting for them. That's helped with their pass defense. Obviously, the young front line is starting to come through. This is a dangerous defense that if the Rams can get up, they've got a defense. It's like if Washington gets up in that game, you're not going to be like, well, Washington's defense is, they're going to lock down Detroit here potentially. And I don't think Detroit, if they get up, is going to lock down Washington either. But I could see if the Rams get up, that defense could rise up the way that it's been and really fluster the Eagles. If the Eagles get up, the Eagles defense could sit on the Rams, but the opposite could happen. And I don't think there's any other game where the underdog this week has a defense that could win them their playoff game, but the Rams do.
Well, if you include the Philadelphia game, the Rams up until that point were giving up just over 25 points per game, all the way leading up to the Sunday Night Football game against Philadelphia. Since then, it's much better. This surge has been led by the defense. So since then, they've given up 17 points a game. But let's just look at the games. They gave up 14 at New Orleans. You remember that game? They won by a touchdown. They gave up 42 to Buffalo. That was just, it's Josh Allen, and he got him. But then they gave up 6 to San Francisco, 9 to the Jets, 9 to Arizona, 30 to Seattle, but that was week 18 when they were sitting guys. And then last week, 9 against Minnesota. So that's a 6, 3 9s, a 14. It's not the offense for the Rams that's been, even though that's where you have the more recognizable names and star power. This has been a defense driven surge, and that's the type of team that's the type of not perceived as good enough team that can make a run. Like famously, there's a bunch of examples, but it's those defenses, and I think they're a good defense, still a young defense, definitely, emerging, and they won the Arizona game for them single-handedly. I mentioned that was the only game they didn't cover. The Rams kind of should have lost that Arizona game, and it was a play made by the defense at the end of the game. So that's what's been the revelation. That's what changed everything. So now with the offensive line together, they're deserving to be underdogs. But I just looked at FanDuel 6.5. I think that's I wouldn't tease Philadelphia down. I wouldn't feel it wouldn't feel good about that. I think you're right with the defense. I wouldn't love the Rams' chances of coming back if they get behind, but it's still Stafford, and this team has shown that they can come from behind when they're down if they have to just change course and throw the ball a bunch, because they love to run, and so that's gonna both teams. That's gonna shorten up this game. So low scoring, good defenses. I like my chances there. So I have to. I was excited when I saw the line coming down because I wanted the money line to come down, and legitimately have a good chance at hedging that 80-1. But my heart says don't do that.
So Chris, when you're listing off the teams that the Rams played, Arizona, Seattle, Jets, right? I mean, to me, that just I don't know. I'm playing devil's advocate here. Is it fair to say that when they go up against an Allen or a Hurts, they don't look the same? Like, they played Darnold, and Darnold's just been, imploding. Is it conceivable that, the Rams are looking good against maybe like above average to below average quarterbacks, but once they play a superstar, then all of a sudden they don't look like the same team? Because I mean, I know Josh Allen's a superstar, but giving up 40 plus to any team like that concerns me at this point. That was a game. Obviously they won, so it didn't matter at the end of the day, but that kind of just puts a little dent to me when I'm looking at their defense.
Yeah. Well, I would say this. Both teams gave up 40 in that game, but no one's concerned about Buffalo. It was a high scoring game, and the Rams won, and they're the ones that need to be concerned. But I see that. But I also see that the Rams gave up 41 the first time they played Arizona. So it's like, which is it? Is it if the Rams do well, the offense is weak? Yeah, that was so, and it's a legitimate point you bring up, because it was part of the criticism that I heard with the Rams. Yeah, they've looked good, but look who they played. True, right? I mean, New Orleans is not the hottest offense, so to give up 2 touchdowns against them and all the injuries they had, but going on the road and giving up 14, pretty good. The Buffalo game was, kind of was what it was, right? It was going to be a shootout against Buffalo. You're right, though. They gave up 37 against Philadelphia, but that wasn't Hurts. Hurts, I don't think had that was Barkley, and it was big runs. So that's my concern is as the game went on, the Eagles wore them down. So I think if the Rams are going to lose this game, it's because the Eagles have a offensive line that can wear down their defensive line, and they have a defensive line that can wear down the Rams' offensive line. I mean, that's the Eagles. That's the strength of their team. That's what's scary about playing them. So I don't know if it's, it wasn't dynamic Hurts the first time. And then especially if there's whatever's going on with Hurts. I mean, I hope he's good. Maybe it was just that first game back after a concussion is supposed to be like a little bit of a dip in production. But what if it's more than that? Everybody's going to play regardless of their, they're not going to, you're going to find out about injuries once the season ends, so it's not a certainty that Hurts is peak Hurts.
RC, are there any guys you're looking at here under the radar that you think that maybe the books are not capturing correctly with respect to props?
The only prop that's kind of maybe under the radar that I could see coming through was something that we bet last week in Josh Carty over 1.5 field goals. He's been on a bit of a heater. I think I can see a world where the Rams don't go for field goals and they kind of try to change up the play like an underdog, play a lot of going forward on fourth downs. But if the Rams can get ahead in this game, if they can get a little control of this game, I think they will take field goals. And the Eagles do have a good defense, so it's not like the Rams are going to be able to score at will in this game. So I like not love, but like Cardi for 1.5 field goals. And I like Dallas Goedert versus a Rams defense that has struggled, has gotten better as the whole defense has gotten better, but they've struggled covering the tight ends. Goddard's been on a nice couple game run since he's been back from injury. A.J. Brown has not been 100%. There's been a little bit of a shift to Dallas Goedert lately. And the line is not it's not a bad line. It's in the 30s. We hit it last week, and I think it's got some legs for this week. Looking up the line now, 35.5. He's averaged more than that for the season. The Rams are not a great defense against the tight end, and Goddard's gotten hot this past couple weeks of some of the offense shifting towards him. So I like Goddard. I like Cardi.
Chris, what about you? What are you seeing here?
And I like Kyron Williams to fumble, and that causes the Rams to lose.
That's the
reason I don't know if you can bet that, but
it's very specific.
Yes.
I don't have any props in a game. I think that I guess my thought is attempts, because I think that there's going to be, each team's going to want to. I think each team's going to be really focused on running the ball, but I haven't even looked at the attempts and really any of the props. So I think I was just really more thinking about the spread in this game and how to hedge that big position. And, the fun of these futures is they, it's a lot of, it's a slow burn. You get to enjoy it for a lot of times. You get to sweat it. But this is the part where I think it's another calculation that I don't think I've completely mastered, but it's fun to get to learn this part too, is what do you do with this? I call it a position because I didn't just do it once. It's kind of building it up for the reason that we could, then we can do something with it afterwards. And we'll talk about it on future shows, but that's where I was like, we're building a position in UConn to make the Final Four. And then hopefully in March, we're having the same discussion of how do you monetize it best? How much risk do you want to keep on the table? Do you want to take some off? So that's where it's kind of fun to almost treat it like you're trading versus, just a straight minus 110 bet. Now, that's kind of really been where my focus is. And once I'm locked in on that, I haven't looked at that. I trust RC on the props.
Well, I hope I didn't freak you out with questioning the Rams D. So hopefully my concern is just
well,
overblown.
You know what, Andrew?
We're already freaked out on everything for the Rams every week.
I could see. If the Eagles stomp them again, it'll be the third time in 2 years. So it'd be like the Eagles, that's a matchup that does not favor the Rams. And then you'd look at it and say, well, assuming Stafford comes back, the future's really bright for this team. They really built the defense up after losing Aaron Donald. Like it would be certainly arrow up on the Rams, but it wouldn't, it would be disappointing, but not shocking if the Eagles did that to them. The Eagles are good. I like the Eagles to come out of the NFC. And so it wouldn't surprise me. I'm just hoping, you get a turnover or two, the Rams can stay in the game and steal it. I mean, the Rams aren't going to go in and crush the Eagles. That I'm decently sure of.
Yeah, that would be a really surprising outcome if the Rams just go and dominate them. But let's go to the last game on the slate, guys. Baltimore going into Buffalo. I think the line opened up as Baltimore being a 1-point underdog, and now they're a 1-point favorite on the road. Over-under here is also high, 51.5. The game is set to kick off 6:30 Eastern. It's going to be about 9 degrees in Buffalo with chance of snow, but the winds are going to be down, which is, I guess, good for passing, but maybe it's going to be more focused on the run. I don't know that there has been a ton of road favorites in the divisional round. I think it's rare to see this, but I'm going to go with my pre-season Super Bowl pick. I think Baltimore gets it done here. The X factor in this game for me is Baltimore having a closer in Derrick Henry. The last time that I think these teams faced off with each other, Baltimore beat Buffalo by like 25 points. I think Henry went crazy in that game, had close to 200 yards rushing. And I think even that game where I believe it was in Baltimore when they lost by 25, I believe that was the worst loss that Josh Allen has had since that Cincinnati defeat. I think they lost by 17 at home in the divisional round like 2 years ago. So like Buffalo doesn't usually get wiped the way that they did against Baltimore earlier this season. So I don't think that Baltimore's going to go in here and have that. They're not going to wax Buffalo, but I do think that Derrick Henry's the difference here and ultimately helps them win the game. Chris, what do you think?
That both of these games are rematches from Sunday Night Football blowouts. That Baltimore-Buffalo game also took place on the Sunday night in week 4. I think for this one, I talked about it last week. I have kind of a profile that I'm looking at certain markers, take the names off the teams and just look at numbers. And the Ravens, unlike past Ravens teams, this year looks good. A lot of times every other year they haven't looked good. So I don't know if that's gonna be the case or not, but I was thinking about it as I was listening to someone say Lamar Jackson has never won more than one playoff game in any season. He's always, if he wins one, he gets bounced. But I don't know that I really care one bit about that, because there was a time where Barry Bonds couldn't hit in the playoffs. His lifetime average was, under 100, and then he hit 400 in the playoffs, after he did some steroids. And Andy Reid couldn't win the NFC Championship. It's always the thing until it's not. So I don't think Lamar Jackson not having a history of it has anything to do with this, because when you see quarterbacks break through, what do they get? They get a running game. They get a defense. The Ravens have all that stuff. So I don't. So the Ravens profile looks nice. The Bills profile looks like we could be in for against the spread loss. The only thing I don't love about it is the steam and the flip of the favorites. That I don't love that. But my pick is Baltimore. And I would say if I had a second, ranking my picks, Kansas City is clearly my best bet. This would be my second one. I did hear some people picking Buffalo, and I didn't like the rationale. I wasn't buying into it. That the Bills rarely lose in the playoffs at home. Lamar Jackson can't win 2 games in the playoffs. Easy bet. That was the rationale. I mean, obviously, you see that there's certainly some people on the side of Baltimore and some money on the side of Baltimore as well. But that's why I'm there, because I think that. I guess the last thing I would say is, like, if you want to bet against Baltimore, I don't know why you do it this week and not next week. I mean, I think if you really want to pick on Baltimore, why would you do it against? I mean, Sean Payton's the only one that doesn't realize that the Bills are small in the middle of their defense, and you can run right up the middle on them. You know, I think that, and the Bills. The Rams got better on defense, so we'll see if Barkley can do it again. Maybe he can, but the Bills didn't get bigger on defense. They're they're decently, and RC, unless I'm missing something, it's decently the same team. And I just think that that's a huge weakness. And Denver decided to have their 220-pound running back inactive to try to run at the Bills. But I don't think the Ravens are going to do that. So I mean, last week was. Fake to Henry Jackson running every play, and it was, the Tecmo Bowl unstoppable play. I don't see the Bills' defense is the weakness there. So I expect Josh Allen to be awesome, but it's almost like the Peyton Manning against the Patriots. It wasn't a Manning Brady thing. Brady was playing against the Colts defense that gave up 30 points a game. Manning was playing against Belichick. I feel like this is the way this game is. You've got Josh Allen playing against a very good. He has home field, but he's playing against a very good defense. And then the Ravens offense goes out and plays against the Bills are an average defense. That's a huge difference.
RC, Chris brought up a really good point with Buffalo being small in the middle, and I think that really plays into Baltimore's hand with obviously having Henry, obviously having Patrick Ricard, a huge fullback in their offensive line. Do you also see that as a potential do you think that's how the Ravens could potentially exploit Buffalo? Where's your head at in this game?
I would not bet this game. Wouldn't confidently bet this game. I can't say I wouldn't bet this game because I already did. Because I do believe in the Buffalo's tough to beat at home in the playoffs, and Lamar Jackson doesn't win 2 playoff games in a row. I'm on that side of the world until he proves it wrong otherwise. Yes, Buffalo does not have a great defense. Everybody thinks the name Buffalo and that they're, the defense from 3 or 4 years ago. I don't think that's the case now. However, I think if I'm the Bills in this game, and I don't know that they'll do it, I'm going to sell out to the run, both Lamar and Derrick Henry, and dare in the cold in Buffalo, dare Lamar Jackson to beat me in the air without Zay Flowers and with Tylan Wallace and slower Mark Andrews and
Bateman
and erratic Rashad Bateman. I will, if Buffalo would please play this game like Dan Campbell was the coach and just attack the run, dare them to throw, and they'll probably hit 1 or 2. But that's okay. You have Josh Allen, so you can come right back on what I think is an improving but still overrated Ravens defense, because we always think the Ravens are this great defense. I see the path for Buffalo just being the better football team here and winning it outright in part because it's at Buffalo. I don't have a lot of strong data or mega confidence that it's going to happen, but if I had to pick a side, I'm surprised that the Ravens are given that this is at Buffalo, that the Ravens are a favorite on the road here. I just thought it was strange when I saw the money line was decent with Buffalo, so I just put a little bit on it, but I just don't. I'm always wrong about the Ravens, so I'm sure they're going to win by 50 here.
I think RC. I think most people have the Ravens rated as their number one team. So, but I do think that how much higher can you have them rated than Buffalo? And the line came out Buffalo -1, and then I saw pick and Ravens -1, and then Buffalo -1, and then and now it seems to be strongly moving in the favor of the Ravens, and that I think that's tough to. It seems tough to justify for me that the Ravens are 3.5 point favorite, 3.5 points better than Buffalo. I mean, you have the head-to-head matchup, obviously, that took place at Baltimore, and that that's it's just it's one game. If we're gonna forgive the Rams for their Philadelphia game, and I just think that there's again, like I said, fundamentally something that I don't know how they change.
And I'll say, to try to knock the Ravens down a little bit, I don't really love the way the Ravens have played in the second half. And I know Lamar Jackson is sexy. I get a feeling that the world is going to be with Baltimore because they just constantly get shoved. Lamar Jackson's the greatest thing that's ever happened. And the Eagles line is so big because Saquon Barkley is really exciting and such a great storyline. I don't see where Baltimore is definitively better than the Buffalo Bills, then given home field and the cold and everything else. But I was looking earlier today, and I got it looking at it now. The second half of the Ravens season, you had that game where Jameis Winston got his first start and just went out and whacked them in Week 8. Then the Ravens come back and destroy the Broncos Week 9. Then a Thursday night game, they beat Cincinnati by a point in a game that Cincinnati should have won. Then they lose the following week to Pittsburgh. They come back and they won that battle of the Harbaughs. But if you remember that game, the Chargers were about to put that game away. It was John Harbaugh going for 4th and 2 from his own 20 that I think even he was surprised. Like, he panicked because the Chargers were out in that game and it looked like the Chargers were going to run away with it. They went for a 4th and 2 from their own 20 or 30-yard line. Everybody was shocked and they got it. And that kind of started to turn the momentum around a little bit. But they needed to do that to beat the Chargers. And then when they did that, they turned around and lost to the Eagles the very next week. So there's this choppy Ravens team in the second half of the season, and then they hit a late bye week, and then they beat at the Giants, which is no shocker. They beat the Steelers, which is no shocker. They crushed Houston, so everybody thinks, oh, Baltimore's the greatest, but Houston stinks. So that win is nice, but I don't think it's the greatest win. Then who cares that they beat Bailey Zappi in Week 18? They did beat the Steelers first round, but it wasn't. I mean, they got out, and then all of a sudden, when it looked like the Ravens were really going to put it away, the Steelers all of a sudden started to close that game in, and it was still a game kind of in the second half. The Ravens were definitely the better team, but I just don't see this dominant Ravens team. I think it's a mirage of sorts because everybody's so blinded by Lamar Jackson. So I'm just going to take the opposite of the thing that the public loves, and I'm going to go with Buffalo. That Josh Allen, he's going to lose the MVP, lost the Pro Bowl or the All-Pro first team to Lamar. He's going to lose the MVP to Lamar, but I think he's going to have a playoff win over Lamar to balance it out. And I don't have a great statistical reason or anything else. This just feels to me like Buffalo's, especially if there's anything to being disrespected. I mean, if you're at the Buffalo Bills and you're an underdog in this game, in a playoff game at home in the winter, that's that's a little extra
Yeah,
motivation on the side of Buffalo.
not to say that Baltimore can't play in cold weather, but I do agree with Buffalo being a underdog here is a little disrespectful for them, whether I think they're gonna win or not. And I think that Allen and Lamar have faced off in the playoffs before, and Buffalo won that game and then subsequently lost to KC. So this isn't the first time they've squared off. Chris, do you see any props here that you want to play?
No, I didn't really look at the props, so I don't even know what's. I'm assuming that we're looking at huge rushing yards, but I'll let RC. Yeah, Derrick Henry 96.5. I think, rightfully so.
RC, is there something that sticks out to you?
No, I hate all the props in this because Buffalo, you can't figure out Buffalo because they've gone to a total, we're going to throw to 19 different receivers, and they're all, the leading receiver is going to have 2 catches. So I did put a little bit on Dalton Kincaid because the Ravens have been susceptible against the tight end. I could see this being a potentially higher scoring game. And if Buffalo's going to throw, Kincaid is a nice mismatch that maybe they'll finally use him as the mismatch that he was intended. And then Derrick Henry's been on such a run, but I have a feeling this is where that run comes to an end because Baltimore will abandon Derrick Henry at the first sign of trouble and try to get cute by bringing Justice Hill into the game too much. And I've seen Baltimore do it a number of times this season where they just do too much rotation. Derrick Henry is so great when he's on the field. Obviously, the whole defense is clued in on him, and it opens up the rest of the offense. But when Baltimore gets down, they all of a sudden start going with Justice Hill as a passing game back, and then it's a break for the defenses when Justice Hill comes in. I could see Baltimore getting away from what should be a heavy Derrick Henry game. That if Buffalo just stacks this and gets Baltimore off of their game, that Henry doesn't hit. Henry's had some weirdly low games here and there, and it's because they stop him early, and Baltimore gets frustrated really quickly and starts getting cute with a bunch of other stuff. So I can see a path where Henry this time doesn't live up to his props, especially if Baltimore can play recently they've played teams like the Steelers and the Browns and the Texans, not the Giants, but it seemed like they're playing Pittsburgh like every other week.
They played them 3 times in the last month and a half.
So when they're the dominant team, when they're the team that's obvious, they will stick with the run. When they can get up over their opponent, they will definitely stick with the run. But when they've gotten into predicaments and they've had to throw the ball more, they've had to play some catch up, like that high scoring game with the Bengals. Derrick Henry only had 68 yards rushing in that game. I think you can get Baltimore. You can bait them to get off of their game. They're off of their Derrick Henry game. I've seen it so many times, and sometimes it only lasts for a quarter, and then they come back to them. But if Buffalo can get the upper hand and make Baltimore play from behind, and they abandon Derrick Henry, Lamar Jackson don't look so good when Derrick Henry's not on the field and having that threat out there. So I can see the way Buffalo can win this game. I'll be interested to see if they pull it off, if they can stick to it, or if anybody can really stop Derrick Henry. But Derrick Henry has been stopped um, a few times this season, had some very weird low results in games that you wouldn't think he would, like against the Bengals. You'd think he would run for more yards on a team like the Bengals.
No, that's a good point. I think we've seen that time and time again when Baltimore is in like obvious passing situations or they get down in games, they pull Henry out where you could try to use him in the passing game. I get that Justice Hill is a nice change of pace back, but like RC said, having Henry there, the defense just focuses in on him and opens up other opportunities maybe for the receivers. But do you think like likely Bateman, any of these guys, like if Buffalo does take Henry out, who's the biggest beneficiary on the Buffalo like receiving end?
I don't I don't know if they can get them off of their game and make Lamar have to be a constant thrower, that the biggest beneficiary isn't the Buffalo Bills defense. This is not a good wide receiver group if Zay Flowers isn't going to play, and I don't think he's going to. Rashad Bateman's okay. Um, Nelson Aguilar is not striking the fear into anybody. Tylan Wallace, Tez Walker. It's not a great offense unless Derrick Henry is rolling. If you can get, you might not even have to stop Derrick Henry cold per se. If you even threw a turnover or you get the ball first and go right down and score. If Buffalo starts to get the upper hand in this game, Baltimore always seems to just get away from Derrick Henry when he does a great job. But when they set him up on screen passes, he's like a tank out when he gets those screen passes. I bet he's 6.5 yards receiving, and they usually don't use him in the passing game when they're in games that they're in control of. They don't feel the need to get cute. I think when they start to get into a more a better opponent situation, then they'll look to Derrick Henry in the passing game. The most targets that Derrick Henry has had in a game this year is 3, and it happened the last time they played Buffalo earlier in the season. Then from that point, he had 3 targets and 3 catches in that game. One of the catches for a touchdown. After that game, 1 target, 0 targets, 1 target, 1 target, 1 target, 1 target, 0, 0. And then they played the Eagles, and it was 3 more targets, 3 catches, 29 yards. When they've played a known top team, that's when they'll start getting Derrick Henry on the field more and in the passing game. And with Derrick Henry, it's just 1 screen pass, and he's going to take it for every game that he's caught a pass in. He's been 10 yards or over 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 out of 11 times where he's just caught at least 1 pass in a game, and it's usually he's just 1 pass. He's going to go over 10 yards with that 1 catch, and then God help you if you get 2 or 3 catches, then he's definitely going to beat it. So I think the low Derrick Henry receiving over, because they've been winning the last couple games and haven't needed to use them in that capacity, is throwing the line off.
Well, that's a
He didn't even
get point.
he didn't get a target in the playoff game, and then their Week 17 game, the last time he played, he did get 3 targets. He's been on as the later in the season. Just looking at it, he's been over 18 yards receiving his last 3 games. Then took week 18 off, and then he didn't have a target in the Steelers game. So when he's targeted, it works. especially for 6.5 yards. So I
Didn't
like
have
the
a
six
target.
and a half yard.
Yeah, and they were in control of that game. It was,
Yeah, they were
but
in control of that game right away.
but Derrick Henry's being bet under on his receptions, like they know the outcome already. Under 1.5 receptions is minus 230. So to have
Wow.
two receptions is plus 172, and Derrick Henry to have 3 receptions is plus 490. When you consider he took week 18 off, like you just said, RC, and then it's one playoff game that he didn't get a target, but it was, not really that competitive of a game. I mean, the Steelers got within. Were they within a touchdown, or was it 28
I
nothing
think it
before they
was
started
two.
scoring?
E,
It was
I don't
21-7.
remember.
I think it was
Yeah,
21-7. Well,
It
so it
was
was
14
largely
nothing, then 21-7.
uncompetitive. And this one, I mean, I'm picking the Ravens only because my numbers show it pretty clear. Trouble for the Bills, okay for the Ravens. But I certainly can see the picture you're painting. I wouldn't be shocked if the Bills won. I think either one of these teams sets up a great AFC championship game that I'd love to watch. So I'm happy about that. And I feel like, if it winds up being Lions Eagles, that's a pretty good championship Sunday. But I think if it's going to get disrupted, I think it's going to be the opportunity to have that scenario not take place is probably in the NFC. I guess this game.
This is a
We're not
battle
really
of this is a battle of two coaches that have really good teams for the past couple of years, but when they get to this type of spot, this is where they totally pucker up and play very conservative, play not to lose.
Yeah.
So it's going to be a battle of which of these coaches doesn't do their normal pucker up and play not to lose.
Well, that was kind of what the thought that entered my mind when people were saying Lamar Jackson can't win 2 playoff games. It's not like the Bills, don't have that stink on them as well, like losing, they're playing at home and they win home playoff games. Well, they've had such a seed where they play the easy game at home and go on the road and lose. They haven't really hosted a tough playoff game. I think certainly not where they're underdogs or have it be within 3-point spread. That hasn't happened with this current group. So you're right.
this is probably gonna be the most interesting game of the weekend, I would say.
Well, you know what? I totally agree. Like you've already got your other 3 teams that punched a ticket, and this was the best game to start with. So they're playing for like that coveted last spot next weekend, and this is the Lions suggest it. People betting on either side of it suggest it. And like I said, the biggest hesitation for me with the Ravens is the favorites flipped. So that's a lot of. I'm going to keep an eye on the bet splits and just see what happens here. But it's really interesting to see it getting driven so hard one way. Can't go much further.
I don't have any trends on that, Chris. Do you know what typically happens when a favorite flips to a dog? How that ends up looking like against the spread?
It's anecdotal and it's regular season, not
playoffs.
Yeah, but I mean, it seems like the move is wrong more than it's right.
So what I would have. Yeah.
You think, oh, it doesn't matter that you're flipping the favorite because it's a point to a point, and it doesn't usually land on those numbers, but it's anecdotal, just experience of saying, I don't like taking a team, even if I like the team, let's say I like the Ravens and they flip from a 1-point underdog to a 1.5 favorite. It's not going to land in that, window. Most likely there's only one outcome, but it seems to be the other side that wins. So it would be a Bills win and all that money goes down in flames. Because I said earlier, they set the line at Bills -1. You're suggesting that the original line was pretty far off. If the Ravens -1.5 is the right answer, that means Bills -1 that was put out there was like a, 57% bet. They're not off by that much.
I think in the playoffs, I remember something like this with the Eagles and Chiefs in that Super Bowl. I think the Chiefs opened up as 2.5 point favorites, and then it swung the other way 2.5. Maybe I'm misremembering, but Chris, I think you're right. Like, even just looking at it, like regular season plus playoffs, seems like the team that ends up being a dog just ends up winning.
Well, RC's point is a good one. Nowadays, maybe always, but certainly nowadays with social media, betting being widespread, they know they're underdogs at home. And you saw last week we talked about the teams that were disrespected. They both won. It was Houston was an underdog. They were being disrespected, and everyone. If you watched television week 17 and 18, if you watched any NFL game, you saw someone say, you got to avoid the Bills. You got to avoid the Ravens. You want to play Houston, and they won and they got their win, yeah. So
Can I throw a hypothetical situation out to see if it changes anything, just for conversation's sake, to kind of wrap this one all up? The first playoff game of the weekend is Houston, Kansas City. If Houston wins that game, do you think that changes? So then Baltimore Buffalo is going to be sitting there playing for the winner's going to have home field advantage over the Texans in the next round. They're going to know that going into that game. Would that change any of your thoughts on either of the teams if Houston was the known opponent waiting for them?
It's an interesting thought, but I think I'd still stick to my guns with Baltimore. But yeah, I'm not sure.
I mean, it would be good news for the winner, but you wouldn't know. It wouldn't make one team more likely to win, I don't think.
I wonder just the psyche of the teams, just talking to talk. Not that it will. I don't know that it favors either team. But
I mean, they're both going to be excited for both of their odds just got better to win the AFC.
If it's Kansas City wins, I almost wonder if they're like, well, we got to win this game, and then, oh boy, we got Kansas City versus, holy shit, we're gonna play the Texans. We're gonna have a home game against the Texans. Like, does that change the way they would coach, or I don't, free up
maybe
their minds,
coach,
or maybe it makes them more lax, or it just a thought that struck me is just because of the timing of the games. Like, what if Baltimore Buffalo, if they knew that Houston had already won, would it change anything?
Well, I think it almost puts more pressure. What does put more pressure on each team, because they each have been run into the Kansas City roadblock. And if they were out of the way, it's two teams that have a history of failing in the playoffs with now even more pressure that they don't need. But as far as, the preparation is done, it's just the prospect of, oh my goodness, if we get this game done, we get Houston instead of Kansas City. It's interesting, but I just can't. Is it an advantage for either team? No, I mean, but it's interesting.
They're both in similar spots in that they've never won the Super Bowl with their current regimes, and they always lose to KC. So it's not like one team is more afraid of KC than the other. So it's like, it's hard to say, but I guess I'd flip it back to you, RC. Is there a coach that you think, they're both conservative, but is there one, if you had to pick, if I told you one of them was going to be more aggressive, would you think that's Harbaugh or would you think that's McDermott?
I'm purely almost hoping it's McDermott, that they get out of this pucker up and McDermott trusts more that if they change up the script and they play a little more aggressive defense against the run, like sell out to the run, dare them to throw, that if they get burned by it, it's okay because they got Josh Allen. I think McDermott is more apt to think that way than vice versa, than Harbaugh is apt to think, well, we're gonna sell out. What do you sell out against the Bills for? If you try to blitz Allen, he's gonna beat you. If you try to do everything to stop James Cook, Allen could rip you apart. There's no one thing that's tilted to me for the Bills that you go, man, if we could stop this, we're gonna win. Like, you're not gonna stop Josh Allen. But I think Buffalo could cut off the run game, could take Baltimore out of their game with Derrick Henry, and then cause a chain reaction that Harbaugh just doesn't respond well to, and this game starts to get out of hand to Baltimore, and then Harbaugh puckers up even more. And the little other X factor of used to be Baltimore in these type of playoff games, you go, man, damn, this close. I could see either team winning, but the Ravens got Justin Tucker. What an advantage that is. That's not an advantage anymore for Baltimore. So if Baltimore plays more close to the vest and is willing to settle for field goals, does Tucker come into play like he has this season? He's cost them some games.
Yeah.
Kicking. So, but Tyler Bass also cost the Bills last year in the playoffs, missing a kick. So
I'll tell you, this is probably why, RC, you're wrong picking Buffalo, and it's probably why the line is getting steamed for the Ravens. I have a tweet here. Everybody knows the Ravens win the Super Bowl every 12 years by scoring 34 points with a 28-year-old quarterback. Andrew, you're nodding. You saw this. RC, maybe not. In 2001, the Ravens won the Super Bowl 34-7. Trent Dilfer was their 28-year-old quarterback. In 2013, they won 34-31 with 28-year-old Flacco as their quarterback. And here it is 12 years later. Lamar Jackson is 28 years old. And the only question is, they're going to win the Super Bowl 34 to what?
were they? So
I love that, RC. Our Super Bowl, our preseason picks.
That's them getting to the Super Bowl. That's assuming they're in the Super Bowl.
Well, that's the trend.
Yeah.
It follows that they.
Yeah, I was thinking of this particular game, but you're talking about
that's
a foregone conclusion. This is them scoring 34 in the Super Bowl.
They could win by one in this game. You win your bet, and then they still go on to win the Super Bowl.
And didn't they beat San Francisco in New Orleans 12 years ago too? I felt like there was this weird thing where the lights went out or something like that.
That was the 34-31 was San Francisco.
Yeah, I think that was it.
The 34-7 was the Giants.
Okay, but the stadium for that Super Bowl, I think, was New Orleans, and it is New Orleans again this year, which is interesting.
All right,
I know you mentioned that when you picked them.
Did I? Oh, okay.
On the preseason podcast, because I listened to it back, we were talking about Burrow and Chase going back to New Orleans.
Yeah.
And Andrew, you mentioned that the Ravens won in New Orleans, their last one.
Got it. I wasn't. Yeah, I probably researched that before that pod and then forgot about it, but I had that in the back of my head.
It just got I reminded myself as I re-listened.
I got two closing items for me for this before and whatever you guys got to close out. But two things from me. Not knowing, obviously, we don't know the outcomes of these games. If you had a free bet, $1 million if you're correct, who's going to win the Super Bowl? The AFC or the NFC?
I would go AFC.
You get one or the other.
AFC. Do you guys think NFC?
I would take. what's tough about it is if Hurts plays a good game, I want the NFC because I think it's going to be the Eagles, and the Eagles would beat any of those three. I think. I like the Eagles over the Ravens. I like the Eagles over the Bills, and it's hard to pick against Mahomes in the Super Bowl, so that would be the tricky one. But for the million, I have to take the AFC because I don't know if it's going to be. I don't even know if it's going to be Philly.
I might lean NFC because I think the two best teams left in this tournament are the Eagles and the Lions.
Not your Rams, RC?
I just need one or the other. Then if it's the Rams, I'm living on borrowed money. I already won $1 million. Yeah, I already won $1 million going into that. And then my last thing, if you want to save it for the very, very last thing, do we want to go over licking our wounds from last week's prop bet disaster? Anybody got any post-mortem items from?
I really thought this isn't a prop bet thing. I really thought Tampa Bay was going to win that game. So when they lost, especially the way they lost with that doinked field goal, it crushed me. And I'm a Falcons fan. It's not like I want Tampa to win, but just everything about that game, the trends, rookie quarterback on the road, I really, in my heart of hearts, thought that Tampa had it, and they obviously had that fumble, which led to a Washington touchdown. Like, there was a lot of fluky things in that game that just swung to the Commanders' way. But that for me, it's not a prop bet, but that was the one that kind of stung the most.
Mine was the Darius Davis. I was so arrogantly sure that was a layup, and that if I did get it wrong, I was sitting on a bunch of winning bets with Marvin Mims and everything else. So I got a little full of myself. I saw that line, and I'm like, Darius Davis is going to hit that 4.5 yards on his first swing pass out of the backfield, as sure as I'm sitting here, and that's going to set the tone for this weekend. And that's exactly what happened, because he got a swing pass, it got a couple of yards, and it got called back for a penalty, and I'm like, yep, that just set the tone for this whole freaking weekend. I'm going to lose every bet because of this penalty on the most simplest of plays. I don't even know how the offensive lineman got downfield that fast on a known swing pass setup that happened so fast. Like, who the hell, do they have like a 4-3 running offensive lineman that got downfield? So if those 2 golden yards would have stood, in theory, we would have hit that over, and that would have really been I would have been playing with house money for the rest of the week. But as soon as Darius Davis went down, I just had this bad feeling they're all going down, and then they did. Marvin Mims went down, then Zacchaeus went down. It's like all the things that we had cashed in on so well over the last couple of weeks, it all came up snake eyes on the weekend.
Well, the Davis thing hurt but the one break that I caught was that on MGM, he was 3.5 minus 120.
Ooh.
So I did have him at 3.5, 4.5, and even a little 5.5 late I took. And all of those would have been good if that first illegal man downfield didn't hit. But I snuck in some under the 4, and the sacks helped. So that was not a killer first game. It went downhill after that for me when Russell Wilson missed his rushing yards. Estime was frustrating to me, but then I found out he was never activated. So that was a refund, which I was happy about. Of course,
that was so good. I was gonna propose a bet that who between us who's gonna have more rushing yards, Akers or Estime, and I wouldn't have not let you off the hook with an inactive. You should pay double for Estime being inactive.
My Jalen Naylor was good. I was happy about that. But watching De'Ami Brown get the Zacchaeus yards, which that was going to be one or the other, and it was the other. But it wasn't like the yards weren't there. De'Ami Brown was putting up the numbers we needed to cash all those bets. So the props were not kind last week. Got the best bet in Philly, but I didn't have my bets sized to where the Philadelphia win canceled out the props. So it was it was rough from that perspective. But the big takeaway for me was next year you got to do the research and know that you need to hit those number ones in the playoffs.
Yeah, the playoffs
I think we're going to find
might
something
not be
there.
the time for the under the radar guys. May be the takeaway. I don't want to make it all about one moment on two particular players, but
well, Jalen Naylor got there, so not everybody failed.
Yeah.
All right. I think that's a wrap for tonight. Thank you for everybody listening. We'll be back next week, same time, to discuss the conference championship game. Go check out RC's site, ffmetrics.com, for all of his content and everything else that on prop betting and whatnot. And then obviously Chris's podcast, Bet the Close. You can find that on, I think, Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Is that right, Chris?
Yeah, we loaded up everywhere. Oh, RC's got something. It's all over the place. Yeah, we got it.
Yes, Mr. Fisher.
Before you close it out, before you hit the unrecord button, at the time that people are watching this on Thursday, or shooting this Wednesday night, East Coast. So when people are watching this Thursday, it could be the countdown to, or we'll have already released the first scouting reports, full scouting reports of the scouting season, which is going to be Thursday evening, late afternoon, early evening on Shador Sanders and Cam Ward will both be out to kick off the scouting season. Our grades and our massively way too long report